All right, so I'm Jordan Thistlewood. I'm the managing director of Cooke Digital. And for those of you that haven't heard of that, that is the new division at Cooke Optics, where we're focusing on how the lens metadata that we've been working on for the last 16 to 20 years can actually be applied through from production, pre-production, and post-production. So this really isn't a talk about technology per se. There absolutely is, sort of a portion of this that is about the film to digital transformation and what's gone on, the new roles that have appeared over the last few years. But really, this is about how stories are told, about filmmaking, about filmmakers, and the people that are helping them achieve those goals. So without further ado, we'll go down the table and let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hello, good morning. Everybody awake? I'm Goldschmidt. I'm a cinematographer, and what else am I supposed to say? I work on, done a couple seasons of House of the Dragon, and I just did The Last of Us this year, Last of Us Season 2.
My name is Fabian Wagner. I'm also a cinematographer, and I've also worked on House of the Dragon with Katie and some other stuff.
What?
Hi, I'm Tamás Papp. I'm a young cinematographer, and I'm also an Unreal technician, and I worked for Greg on June Part 2.
Hi, my name is Mark Purvis. I run a company called Mission Digital, so we effectively do DIT, Digital Dailies, specialist workflow, so I'm at the nerdy end of the table.
I'm Nadia Khairat. I'm a freelance colorist, and I work along all genres, fiction, narrative, long form, and short form.
And one important detail, round of applause, she won the music video category in the Film Light Color Awards. All right, so we can get to know you guys, so we can shape our discussion. Who here are students or aspiring cinematographers? Awesome, okay. Working DPs? All right, people that are also supporting cinematographers? Other roles, great. Manufacturers, people, yeah. Excellent, good to see some peers in the audience. Thank you for coming. All right, so we're gonna play a couple clips to get started. So we'll look at some of Fabian's work from Game of Thrones, and then we'll look at The Last of Us Season 2 trailer that includes Katie's work that was shot on Cooke lenses. If the technology wants to play ball. Which is not happening at the moment. All right, we'll try that one again. We'll give it a minute. Okay, we'll try coming back around to that. I am sorry, Fabian.
Oh, you want to start or what? Let's try something different. You can't heal something unless you're brave enough to say it out loud. I'm not bound by my say the thing you're afraid to say. Say it out loud, no matter what it is, no matter how bad. What did you do?
I should say that trailer features as well the work of my other co-DP, Ksenia Sereda. So just to give her props.
But still, great work between the two of you. Thanks. And Fabian, I'm so sorry about the clip not playing. All right. We'll come back around to that. We'll give it a second shot after I get a chance to kick the computer a bit. So through the course of the conversation today, we want to talk about the different roles in sort of a bit of a linear fashion, but it doesn't mean that they are all happening in sort of linear ways in the course of a production. And also that the current state, the future state, what everybody can aspire to in terms of these roles, and the evolution of the workflows, how we can all work together across all the multiple disciplines, onset and offset, is kind of the goal here. So if you guys have had experiences where it's like, this was great, but just know that it's your voices that, working with your compatriots and people that are building the tools for you that allow for those changes to happen that make the next generation of the workflows better. All right, so we're going to sort of focus a bit on some of the work that Tamás has been doing with Greg Fraser. The two of them have kindly contributed some of the work that they did on Dune 2. We'll be able to walk through two sequences, one focusing on the spice harvester and one focusing on what was called the Cave of Birds. All right, Tamás, do you want to sort of maybe give us a bit of an intro into what was the setup of this, and I'll just pass through the first frames while you're doing that.
Yeah, so this was the spice harvester attack scene. So as you can see in real life, I mean, if Dune was real, this whole big harvester is like really, really big. So the challenge that Greg had to deal with was, so Denis really likes to storyboard all the shots. So what we started to do as soon as we had the boards was to lay out what we do where and how we do it. So parts of this scene were shot in Origo, in Budapest, and parts of it was shot in Abu Dhabi. So the challenge was that whatever we did in Origo had to match exactly what we did in Abu Dhabi in 3-4 months after we shot the stuff in Origo. So in Origo, we had this setup where what you can see here is a sound path. You can see for camera angles. The camera setups that you can see, it has a sensor and it has a lens on it. But one thing to keep in mind that it can slightly change. It can slightly be different in real life. That's because of how the physics of the lens work in real life, and in 3D it works a little bit different. But it's a really good starting point, and it's really close to what you're going to get. So in this shot, what you can see is, so this setup worked for all the stuff where they go under the harvester, while they are under the harvester and when they come out of the harvester. So nothing else was shot here. So what you can see, there are two 40 by 40s that create the shadows. And there's also the other thing that creates the shadows is the legs, the proxy leg that you can see in the right part of the shot. Basically, we had two directions. One direction was looking into the belly of the harvester and looking, like the camera being under the harvester and looking through the belly. So when we did look through the belly, that's when we saw in the background the leg and like all the shadows and everything moving. So the harvester, the belly and everything was moving. So the concrete pads that you can see there was the amount that the harvester was able to move, as it's like a constantly moving thing. So one of the reasons why we did it in Origo was to make sure that it's like a really finicky thing to do, because every time you roll the camera, you have like 10, 20 seconds to do the shot. They start to, there were some tractors, so the tractors started to pull some chains, and the chains started to pull the whole thing, and you were not able to be around it because of safety reasons. So you had to make sure that all the decisions you make, you make it so that it works for later. So it was a highly complicated thing. We had a really good summer, so there were loads of sun. So we didn't have any problems with that. But we did have to play around what size of shadow makers with 40 by 40s we need to make, so that the two shadows are connected on the ground for the time when we wanted to shoot it. Something else to note. Can you go back for 1 sec? So another thing that might be, maybe you would think it's a small thing, why do you even care about that? But all the other backdrops that you can see around the leg, they had to be in an angle in which the sun hit them for the time when we were shooting it. So that's another small detail that if you don't take control of that, then maybe they build it in a way where sun is not hitting it, and everything that you can see there, or the backdrop, it should represent the desert that's behind the legs. So it has to be highly lit. Yeah.
So in terms of being able to rely on the times, how well did it work out that you could sort of pre-plan the time of day to shoot and then actually execute it?
At one point, so we started this whole thing with Greg as a proof of concept, and then we went on from there. So we started with, so our department gave us all the models, so that already existed. So what we started to do, they said that we can place them anywhere. So Greg just tried to pick the best place for it, based on what else we had in the exteriors of the studio. So that was one thing. And yeah, it just, we made everything in Unreal, so by the time it was built, there was none of those questions. So you had so many other questions to deal with. So but half of it you were already able to get out of the way before anything was built. So yeah, it was working out well. And for all the other exterior shots and all the other exterior sets in Origo, we just started to use Unreal like hardcore for times, for exact times. So in some of the cases, we don't have a presentation for that, but for the arena scene, we put that into between two stages, and we were able to tell when sun started to hit the sand between the two stages, and we were also able to tell when the sun, by the minute, what time the sun would just flip through one of the stages, so that the shadow would start to appear on the sand. So yeah, we just started to use it. And this is what you can see here is how it would look like if it was real, and what we actually had on the day. So how we did this is, I talked to the gaffer and I talked to Greg, and they told me that we are going to have four 40 by 40s with 4 cranes, and we're going to have a couple of Manitous and with 20 by 20s. And we had those 2 legs, which were moved with exclamators. So all they could do is lift it up and put it like 2 meters that way. So each time you rolled, there was that movement. So
I just have a question. So was the goal to just shoot it all in shade, or are you trying to use the 40 bys to mimic the shadow play of the harvesters?
It was to mimic the...
Gotcha.
Yeah. So basically for some of the other stuff that we did as well, Greg is always trying to keep everything real, and that's why I think it works really well, because he's trying to stress the scenario, push everything that he has, all the resources, in a way where he uses so optimized that he can get the best result, like to achieve the real thing, what would happen in real life. So in this case, the first challenge that I got was, this is what we have. Let's build it in a way where we have the biggest amount of shadows. Because this setup is for the part where they come out of the sand, they run past the harvester to the middle of it, they fight a little bit, and then they go under the harvester. So this is only for that setup. But then they go out on the other side, so then you had to rotate the whole thing 180 degrees to make sure that the sun was actually hitting into where the shadows were before, because that's supposed to be the other side. So to have something like Unreal for logistics as well, like where do all the cranes go? Where do all the 40x40s go? Where do the exclamators go? Then I can just make multiple setups, and then all the ADs and everyone knows what we're going to do and when. And also, another challenge was that this was shot in the end of October, early November. So the amount of sun we had was very limited. So as you can see, at the beginning of the day, you can't really shoot because the shadows are so long, and it's changing so quick. So you had like 5 or 6 hours during the day when you can shoot.
So Catherine and Fabian, based on your experiences with pre-vis and the work you've done, what is your thought on this as sort of a future technique that you guys could apply to your own work, either through assistance or if you ever had time to learn Unreal Engine yourself?
I mean, yeah, super useful. Wish I'd had you, because no, I don't know how to use Unreal. But I mean, just to say, like, I mean, obviously, what you guys are doing here is what we do in like a more less specific way. You know, like we're still tracking the sun, we're still doing sun path, we're still, you know, we still have to figure out where to put all the cranes and where to put, you know, everything. But it's just less like the actual pre-visualization tools are much less specific, in my experience, what I've been able to do than this, which is very impressive.
I mean, I used to hate this stuff, and I kind of still do. Sorry, but I am getting very much into it. I'm getting very much into it. But I used to be, and part of me still is. I love to prep as little as possible, and I love to work on as much of intuition as I can. But obviously, when you do shows like Game of Thrones or those very visual effects heavy shows, you can't do that. So I had to sort of force myself to find a balance. The first time I used this was on season 8 of Game of Thrones because we had so much, when we built for episode 5, I think we built a massive set, and back then it was less creative, it was more about budget. Like how much do we actually have to build to keep a certain amount of the action in camera, because it's obviously all about budget in the end. So it was a much less creative process, which was a real turn-off for me. But I'm currently prepping for Masters of the Universe. He-Man? Anyone here loves He-Man?
My child would come to screen.
And by the power of Grayscale, we've been using Unreal for the last couple of months. And I've been sort of getting really into it. So we've had, you know, we do the boards, we go through to the art department, and they create it all, and we put it into the Unreal Engine, and then we can actually see what we're doing and how we're doing it. Again, right now, a lot of it is budget and organizational stuff, and it's super handy to show everyone, okay, where are your cranes going, where's this going? I mean, I love this. I've never done anything like this where it's so precise, and obviously Greg is a genius, and with your help, you know, I mean, what I find amazing is watching this. I've seen that sequence, obviously, and every single shot is perfect. And seeing how you've done it is just mind-blowing. But what I want to ask is, obviously you only had a certain amount of time for those shots, and everything was so precise with the sun moving. Did that mean you had to shoot totally out of sequence sometimes for the actors, or how was that?
You know, I was not in Abu Dhabi when they shot that. I was at home on my computer. So I just received Greg's photos of the set saying, okay, this is where he just sent me a photo, he just took quick. This is where the leg is, that's where the 40x40 is, that's where the crane is. How is it going to look like during the day? So that's, yeah, I wasn't there. So I don't know, but I think it's like, so once they did that, it just started they started to take the whole thing apart. So they rotated it, then they took it apart for different shots, so to create scale as well. But I think that we didn't pre-vis that or tech-vis that, but I do think that understanding like how much light you have, like how it changes, like what you have, like what are the sizes of everything, you just start to think, like, because we did this like in August, July. So Greg had like loads of time to prep in head, like how it's best to do it. And then they did have that part where it wasn't tech-vised. So they just did everything on on the fly.
No, that's great. We're doing something similar right now. I mean, not as intricate as this, but we're using a lot of shadow makers and talking about where they should be, and not as complicated as this. But what I especially love about this is the movement. You know, there's a big difference between having a static shadow maker or something that actually moves, which is amazing.
So Fabian, for you and for you, Catherine, where does this need to reach when it goes out of that sort of logistical level to where you feel it's like the ultimate creative tool for you?
I mean, where does it need to reach? You mean like what else needs to
What do you need to be
occur?
able to do where it basically changes from being a logistical, how do we make it tech viz with a very sort of high fidelity, to something where you're exploring your lighting and your staging and your...
Oh, I see
camera
what you're
moves?
saying. I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, I guess, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Tamás and I were talking about it a little bit before the panel, like, because he was saying, you know, what if you could just move the camera around the scene ahead of time, right? That's basically the gist. And I was saying, well, that sounds really cool, because my experience, like the traditional sort of workflow, as far as the shows I've done, is, you know, much more old school, where, you know, I sit with the director, we talk about the sequence, we throw ideas back and forth about what we want the shots to be like. Then we sit down with the storyboard artist and talk them through our shots, basically. You know, we make the storyboard. Then those boards go to the pre-vis company, and either we all get on a call and talk them through, or they just do a first pass. And I mean, I don't know. I have all the. We have some examples of this, so you guys can actually see the way this workflow works. You know, before they actually animate it, they send us, you know, their boards, basically. We make notes, and then they animate it, and then we just iterate from there, and we get on more calls, we give them more notes. So it's, you know, it's like quite collaborative and very, you know, discussion-based. But if it was actually something where, like, we sat there and we moved the camera around, you know, that would be interesting, could be faster, but then, I don't know, maybe some people would not have a job or something, I'm not sure. Does that answer your question-ish?
Yeah.
What was the question again?
What would make this your creative tool is essentially the...
I mean, I think for me, the creativity doesn't come from the tool. I think the creativity comes from someone like Tamás, you know, and then having a working relationship. It's like working with a DIT, right? I'm super non-technical. Not that I don't care, but I don't care about technical aspects. And I don't know that much about it, but I obviously need to have I need to know, and so I surround myself with a person who does. And for example, so my DIT is that person, but the reason why he's a great DIT is not because of that. He's a great DIT because he's a very creative collaborator. So, and I would look at this, I think, the same way. So it's the person that's doing it, I think, that would make it interesting for me, you know, so.
I agree. I guess it's just like, if it's just me by myself with this as a tool, then there's nobody who I'm bouncing ideas off of. There's, you know, like, I really appreciate that discussion and that generation of ideas and that sharing. So, you know, and that's also why I do this job, for that collaboration. So I wouldn't want to just be myself with my computer. That would not be my way to use this. But working with somebody like Tamás and having it be, you know, just another way to communicate, you know, what we have to communicate anyway. You know what I mean? Like, the decisions you guys are making based on this, we have to make those decisions whether we have this tool or not. So it just makes it easier.
All right.
I think the very crazy thing about all this is that this all already exists, like, piece by piece for the production. So if they do like a pre-vis, they have an animation for all the movements. So then you can put that into the 3D environment, and then you can light it. You can put down cameras. You can have a look at everything that you would have a look at on the day on the set as a DP, but without all the other people. So it's like a safe place where you can start to think about the scene, and then it's not like that when you. So my experience is that when you have a pre-vis, you get the pre-vis, you have a look at it, then you give some notes, and then you send back the pre-vis, and then they send you a new pre-vis in a couple of days, and then you change some stuff again. But this way, if you would do it in a way where everything is put into one place, like in real life, then the only thing you would need to ask them to do is to change the movement of the characters and like the blocking and all that. So I think in what I think would work really well if all these departments could work a little bit better together, then all this is possible. I mean, yeah, I just put everything together.
I think listening to all of you guys, I think, so what I realized, because on season 8, Jonathan Freeman really got into this, and he was basically planning his shots like 2 months before they were actually shooting it. And I thought it was interesting, but I just couldn't get my head around it. Because part of me, so I would be my own worst enemy, part of me just wants to turn up and have no fucking idea what's going on, and then make it up, which is something I love the thrill of that. But it also causes a lot of issues sometimes. So I guess I have to have a chat with myself.
All right, one final question before we move on to asking Mark about how his company and his teams also sort of play into the whole production process. Tamás, if there are aspiring cinematographers in the audience who are kind of on the cusp, what would you recommend to them to be able to take part as someone like you in a future production?
So I think the most important thing is when you do Unreal, you can think like a filmmaker, but there's loads of things that you. So when you do Unreal, you're thinking more like technician and less like a cinematographer. So I think that's why you need one person in between, because if I would do it for myself, it would be really hard, because I would like to line up a shot, but some technical issues would come up, and then I would try to solve the technical issue, and I can't concentrate so I would get out of the flow. So I think for Greg as well, I try to make it as fluid as possible. So I think for some smaller stuff, it is worth to do as a cinematographer. But that's a struggle I'm in right now as well, where I would like to be a cinematographer, and I'm doing Unreal as well. So it's like, at one point, I don't think, I mean, it's really hard to, so let's say that you have a set that's going to be built on a stage. You can really easily do that. It's a pretty quick thing to do, and you can place down some lights, and you can place down some cameras. You can let the art department know, like, this wall should flow, that wall should flow, like, how much space do I have here? So you can do all that. So that's a pretty easy thing to do, and I think it's worth to do, because it doesn't take that much time. I mean, it's not, Unreal gets really complicated once you try to do more than that. So that's where the rabbit hole is like endless. So I think for smaller stuff, it's definitely worth to learn Unreal, and loads of the big real-world camera manufacturers are trying to create digital twins for cameras, for lenses, for lights. So that way, what I think would be really cool, but I'm not sure that you think the same thing, is that basically at one point what you could do, you could just put down a test setup, and you could test all the lenses that exist in the world, and then you can choose based on what you see in Unreal, like what kind of equipment you want to use, because we're going to get to a point where it's going to be like 99.9% accurate. And of course, when you turn up in the rental house, maybe that serial number lens is a little bit different, but just a little bit. The big features of all these setups will be basically what you can see. Yeah. So
I hope I'll be retired when that happens. I want to just ask, do you use AI for this stuff?
No, no.
Controversial word in there.
So also, I think where it's also really interesting for my generation, because once I started to use Unreal, I just started to think, for thinking-wise, I think it's worth to do Unreal, because you start to think outside of the box. So you can do stuff that doesn't exist with camera angles, with lights. So you can just play around with ideas. What if I would have 100 light bulbs, or what if I would have a light like 20 meters? Is it worth it, or is it worth to try to cheat it in another way, in a cheaper way? So I think there's so many possibilities that you can do that you can't do in real life. And also it's like, I think it helps think. Like doing all this is you start to think more technically about all the cinematography. Like, yeah.
I'd just be interested to know, because I think there's a difference between you and other people who do this kind of stuff, because you want to be a cinematographer, and you are. I'm sure you shot some stuff.
Very kind, thank you.
So you probably look at this, when you do this, you look at it from a very different perspective than someone who just is a technician who knows the program very well.
Yes, I mean, I think you need to understand what. So in many cases, Greg is only asking for a couple of things. So like he says, he doesn't explain in like a monologue. He says like in one sentence when he has a time, okay, Tamás, let's do this. And then I need to get back to work and figure out a way to do that. But to understand that one sentence, I need to understand what he means, what is behind the sentence. So I think it's, to work for a cinematographer, it's really worth to understand what they do as well as cinematographers. So that's when you know what they mean. I also feel that communication in productions can go really wrong, and what Unreal helps with a lot is once you can see it, it's like, no question, okay, where's the crane? There, fine. And on the day, it's still there, because it was there on the pre-vis as well.
Very cool. And for those of you who haven't yet dabbled with it, you can download Unreal Engine for free. There are many tutorials, and there's a lot of like template sets, so you don't have to learn everything to get started. So if you're curious, just jump into it. All right. So we had another section, but we can come to that later, potentially. Want to then sort of look at, Mark, for your section, can you lead us through what's been the transformation that you've seen? What sort of spurred you to form Mission Digital, and how have you and your team sort of been collaborators to cinematographers?
So I'm going to give a slightly long-winded answer to this and talk a little bit about the why. So I think when I was a young kid, my father wanted me to be an economist, and dangerously left his Pentax Spotmatic within reaching distance. And I picked up that camera and fell in love with it. I still have that camera, and I had these beautiful Takuma lenses, and I went buying them all off eBay and became just obsessed with photography. And I love the fact that you could tell a story in a single frame. That's what, I'm passionate about. And I should say, just before I get into anything, I am, even though I'm the digital guy, I'm very passionate about celluloid. But then I went through a revelation at one point, and I was playing around with a friend's digital stills camera, and I discovered Lightroom. And I spent all this time, and I'd spent a lot of time in the printing area doing my own prints and manipulating my own images and burning and shading and so forth. And then I discovered Lightroom, and I was playing around with Lightroom, and I was blown away that I could manipulate these images in a computer. And then I closed the file, and I found this XML file in the computer, and I was like, what's that? And I just threw it in the trash can. And then I opened up Lightroom again, and all my work had just disappeared. Panic. And then I thought, oh, hang on a second, that XML file. So I closed Lightroom again, and I brought the XML file back in and opened it up again. And all my work was there all of a sudden. And like a light bulb moment, I thought to myself, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And what I started to realize was...
Sorry, you mean you wanted to panic?
Well,
and then realize it's not that bad? And then panic again?
they kind of go hand in hand, and I wish that I knew that the panic bit was, I was going to spend the rest of my life panicking and then putting out fires, because I am a firefighter. And I'll probably get into that in a bit later. But yeah, I realized that the power of metadata, and this was probably about 15 years ago. And I think that the way we treat metadata, and I'm probably one of half a dozen people in the room that's obsessed with metadata. And I'm always the lonely person in the pre-production meetings when I say I'm obsessed with metadata. But it's funny because we're all dependent on metadata, and we've all been dependent on metadata for a long time. And there's a number of times that you go through family photos, you know, your grandmother with your parents on a beach in Cornwall from 1960. And the only reason you know that photo's from Cornwall in 1960 is because someone wrote on the back of the photo, Cornwall, 1960. And we just saw those were handwritten notes. But those handwritten notes basically become metadata. And when you're dealing with the complex world now, and go off on a little bit of you know, I was saying this before to the guys, that we talk about throughout the time, people have always said this is going to be the greatest transition from since black and white to color. Whether it be like 3D or VR or something like that. But I always thought the most important transition we had that no one ever spoke about was the introduction of CGI. And CGI gave us all the power to tell the stories that the directors imagined in their minds, but they couldn't capture on camera. And it's now very rare that a production will have any, like zero VFX in it. We're doing a TV show in Australia at the moment, like comedy show, and even that has 50 VFX shots an episode. And the ability to eliminate, like, there's so many decisions we do day in, day out, you know, from the moment you wake up, what socks you're going to wear, to what you're going to have for breakfast. You know, it becomes exhausting making all these decisions, but there are a number of decisions you make throughout the day that you're doing it based on information that you're going to get. You know, I know if I get the 50mm lens, I need to apply this, or I know that on this scene, the lighting was off, so I need to apply these color adjustments. But if that metadata's there, and could drive those decisions for you, then you can spend more time, rather than addressing those decisions, you can spend that time focusing on creative output. And so the thing that excites me and the impact that we want to have as a company is eliminating all the distractions from the creative process and ensuring that artists are working on what they want to be doing. We don't believe that making things more efficient makes things better, but we think spending time on doing things that are inefficient is completely demotivating and distracts people from doing their best work.
Okay, that's a great introduction to the philosophy of Mission Digital. So Catherine and Fabian, you know, because Fabian, you specifically called out your DIT, and you know, Mark, your team is strongly sort of in that sort of role of providing those key talent to the set. What is the sort of linchpin or strongest, what is your collaboration with DITs like on set, and how are they empowering you?
So my collaboration with my DIT is very close, especially when I'm doing a show like House of the Dragon or Last of Us, where we have 2-3 cameras all the time. Then I'm obviously not operating. I'm sitting right next to them, and we're monitoring all the cameras. We've already, you know, obviously figured out the LUT before we started shooting, so that's our baseline, and then we're doing CDLs off of that, and yeah, and then it's about, you know, making sure that those CDLs and all the decisions we're making on set, you know, go all the way through the dailies pipeline. And so they're sort of my, key point to talking with the dailies colorist. And that's how they help me.
Yeah, I mean, with my main DIT, I've worked with for more than 10 years. You know, I think with all of my team, I always try and have people who know a lot more than I do. And obviously, that's something that helps. But it's not just about, you know, I don't want my DIT just to be like, hey, this looks a bit bright, or this looks a bit dark. They mostly say that looks a bit dark. But I wanted to have like a creative opinion. And so Ian Mars, who's my main DIT, he's, you know, I can rely on him on all the technical stuff. And telling me that it's too dark or whatever. But he also has a creative opinion. So he also tells me sometimes, looks, I think it might be better to do this, or might be, you know. And that's for me, that's a really interesting dialogue. I mean, I used to love shooting film, and I still do sometimes, and it's beautiful. But the digital revolution and this whole thing, once we were through the painful part of Pro 35 adapters and all of that stuff, and once the cameras became what they are now, you know, to work with a DIT, I think is a huge, for me, is a huge, I love collaborating with people, and it's like one of the closest collaborations you can have, like with your gaffer or focus puller when you operate, or you know, and it's just, I think it's beautiful. It makes my job, I would say, more enjoyable when I'm shooting.
If they're good.
If they're good.
And then Mark, how do you, like, you know, feel that sort of rounds through, because you guys have to sort of manage a lot of the technical process on your side, but you are facilitating the creativity through Mission, so.
I mean, I think before we even get into that, I'll just sort of talk about the personalities, because I think the personalities is make or break. So some of my clients know me for, I like to put a Tottenham DIT with an Arsenal DOP. I like everybody to have a common interest, but just enough so there's a bit of banter between the cinematographer and the DIT. So, and following that methodology, we've been able to forge long-standing relationships where you almost build like a family of friends around you. And if you get that right, then you've got the foundations to build a creative collaboration. If you don't have, like, I think the majority of things that end up falling apart generally come down to one simple thing, which is cultural misalignment. And if you can get that cultural alignment going, and what I like about what we just saw with the Unreal, is that gives like a point of focus for everybody, and it gets everybody aligned on what they want to see. And what I like about, you know, if I get that personality right, then we've got the foundations we've got that cultural alignment. We open up the doors to collaboration. Then you get the form of trust. And then once you've got the form of trust, then we know that we can look after everything for the cinematographer, and we can allow them to focus on we just want this measure of success for us is seeing that relationship between the cinematographer and the director, and then just trusting our team to look after the rest.
Very cool. Nadia, as a colorist, what has, you know, and you've got also a lot of experience. You trained as a DP, you've been a DIT, you've done visual effects, you're now an award-winning colorist. How do you feel these roles fit together, and as your role as a colorist, and then also your experience as a DIT, that sort of exchange of post to onset and then looping back through, how does that sort of factor into your sort of creative work?
Yeah, thanks. I think as you mentioned, trust and communication is the key. So for me, being at the end of the post-production chain it gives me a lot of confidence, and also space to talk and to know what they need, or know how to ask what they need for all the whole process. So I kind of like can go to the cinematographer and say, hey, how are you going to approach this scene? What lenses are you going to use? What cameras? And then maybe go to the DIT and we set up a project together. We build some LUTs, we do some tests. And even now I'm normally not on set, but lately for a feature next year, I was able to go, and there's a very complicated sunset scene, and we actually build a whole like project together for the rushes with different LUTs and checking also textures. So this gives me kind of like the thought of, okay, if this is going to VFX, what kind of plates do we need as well? And all this like kind of like workflow, full pipeline knowledge is really, really good for the whole team. Yeah.
And Catherine and Fabian, what about you in terms of how does that work for you in terms of setting up that space for that creativity, for the images that you kind of want to achieve, and then working with the colorist so that you kind of have that, you know, sort of targeted, color that you're looking for so that you can light to it and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the main tool is the creation of the LUT, I think, before you start shooting, because that, lets you sort of skip ahead to the end, and show everybody what you want it to look like ultimately, and then you bring it back to the beginning, and so then it's just part of the workflow. And that is very essential, I think. Otherwise, it gets, quite messy.
Okay. All right, then Mark kind of dropped into the conversation, certainly one of a word that's relevant to the world I live in and what we're doing at Cooke with /i technology. So metadata. How often and when, I know, Fabian, I know it's not. How often have you guys been on shows where it's collected? Because we know, our point of view is that it is the way to communicate your decisions through to other stages in the pipe of the production process. How are you maintaining your vision? How do they know what T-stop, the focus? There's lots of things that go into it. Henry, if you're in the audience, here it is. Had a conversation with a young man earlier this week, and when we were talking about metadata and visual effects and setting them up to succeed, his analogy was it was like asking somebody to bake a cake but not giving them the flour. Right? If you aren't giving them the key ingredients to be successful. So for you guys, I know it's a very nerdy topic, but if it's, if it is the key to success for making sure your vision is carried through to the hundreds or thousands of visual effects artists, is it something that you drive for? Is it something that you feel more often as a pull from the visual effects supervisor? And then Mark, how are you guys working to maintain it?
Can I just quickly, only because I just woke up. I'm obviously only joking, and I know it's super important, and it's super helpful for me, obviously. And I love, I never planned to do all these visual effects heavy movies or shows that I've been doing, but I kind of fell into it, and I love doing them. And it's, it helps the workflow in every process. It helps me, it helps the look of the show, it helps the whole thing. So don't take it personal. It was just a joke.
Because I knew I was doing this panel, I wrote to our visual effects supervisor on Last of Us to just be like, how is this is useful to you guys, right? And he was like, it's absolutely essential, because obviously they have a team of people who are there taking all, the manual notes, but it's not dynamic. So in other words, like a focal distance for them, if they write the note, that's a static piece of information, whereas what the lens, the metadata that travels from the lens through the pipe has, as that changes throughout the shot, and for them that's essential. They just feed that straight into their CG cameras, is what he told me. So that's what happens.
I just want to say that was probably the most satisfying moment of the show, just watching Fabian really awkwardly address that, because as far as I'm concerned, if a cinematographer is worrying about metadata, we're off to a bad start. Our job is to make sure that that is completely invisible to them. We want to, as far as we're concerned, we just want them to know that we're looking after it. And it should never be a concern of yours. I think that, at times as a DIT, you're trying to make sure that you're there obviously to support the cinematographer's vision, but you're also there to effectively become the glue of the whole production. And I think the DIT's role really now extends much more beyond the responsibilities to the cinematographer, but to the whole production. It's almost like having the way the production is today, and we've got so much changing, because of the allocation of talent, because of where tax incentives are, you end up with it's almost like you've got these talent just across the world, and it's almost like having an orchestra where your wood is in Britain, and your brass is in Vancouver, and your percussion is in Mumbai, and you need to orchestrate this all remotely. And that's really difficult to do. And it's funny because we've been working quite closely with Cooke recently, and we were thinking, it took me back to a Camerimage a while back, and there was this breakfast I'd organised where brought together a bunch of people that were interested about metadata, like the 10 around the world. And it was myself, it was the former chairman of Cooke, Les, who decided to stick around at Camerimage longer to have this conversation. So he obviously liked metadata conversation. Guys from Ambient, guys from Zeiss, and then Netflix invited themselves along to the meeting, which was interesting. And we just basically said, right, we're going to lay a stake in the ground to make this transition of metadata straightforward. And we all wanted to do it, but it was actually a really difficult thing to implement. And in the end, we got a bit sick of trying to do it. We implemented it on one project, but it was really difficult to replicate. So we decided to effectively build our own platform that would aggregate metadata and seamlessly inject it into the files that the VFX vendors receive. So that dynamic frame-by-frame metadata, oh God, I keep on saying that word, and I feel sorry for everybody hearing it over and over, but that frame-by-frame metadata was just there. And so all that focal length, all that iris, we were playing around with a virtual camera system. It's now owned by a competing company, but it was an NCAM system. It was a disaster for us, but it was a huge education process for us, and that allowed us to start looking at how we could put camera XYZ positioning into the VFX metadata so that you knew exactly where the camera was in relevance to the set and to the actors and so forth, and that allows you then to seamlessly integrate into a VFX 3D environment. And so why this becomes important, and I feel like, you know, we're at a Cinematography Festival talking about VFX, and it gets, you know, maybe back to what I was saying before about how important CGI is to storytelling. I do think CGI is make or break for some cinematographers. It can really ruin the audience's perspective of cinematography if the VFX is bad or doesn't look seamless. But also, if it's inefficient, it's resources allocated to a part of the production that could be better, allocated to having. You know, if I went through most of the cinematographers I talk to, I know that they're not excited by technology, and they would say they would swap all the technology in the world for an extra 5 days of production time, right? Now, I can't give them an extra 5 days of production time. That's not in Mission's wheelhouse. But what we can try and do is make the VFX process, which is probably one of the largest lines in the budget, so much more efficient that you could reallocate those resources to more production time. And that's, you know, so what, you know, as a, you know, my favorite films are like Sorrentino films. They're not VFX films. But what can I do to get that, to be part of that creative output is to make sure that money's not being spent unnecessarily on rotoscoping or compositing that can be made efficient, and that you know, rather than say 10 million being invested in VFX work, that 10 million is an extra 10 days in the shooting schedule.
It's all about, you're saying it's all about streamlining the workflow, right? Which is, and that's exactly what you're doing, and that's where all of this stuff helps. This is just a funny anecdote, but what still goes wrong is then the human interaction, right? So on this last movie I've done, you know, we did the pre-shoot in prep with all the post-production meetings of the workflow and everything, and you know, you have these Zoom meetings, massive Zoom meetings with all these people in LA, different, you know, and you talk about, and we're all there, and Ian, my DRT, is there because he's the, you know, and we go through it all. Okay, we're shooting RAW, we're shooting this camera, this much is for IMAX, this much is blah, blah, blah. You go through it, it takes like an hour, it's the most tedious conversation. It's a very simple workflow. And then they do the same meeting again 2 weeks later, and then they do it again. And on this job, I think we did 6 of those meetings in pre-production. We then went to Spain for 8 weeks to shoot, and they wanted to do the same meeting again before we went to Spain. And I'm like, why do we have to do this again? We're shooting the same cameras, nothing's changed. Then we went to America to finish the movie, and we had to do it again. And
yep.
So the streamlined process.
So that doesn't happen with us.
Incredibly convoluted
so,
and boring.
And this is probably, so we're going through a bit of a, it's almost like a living, breathing thing. And you know, you watch a child grow over time, and I feel like the way digital production's changing. It's almost like a living, breathing child that's growing up and changing. You need to address it differently. And so as a company, we built this reputation for being a DIT and dailies company with a bit of video playback in there. And I really don't, it's almost like saying you're a restaurant. Instead of saying you're a restaurant, it's like we use lettuce and potatoes. And what we want to be seen as is as a production technology and a workflow partner, because when it comes to that, we command those workflow calls. We produce a Bible that's a living, breathing document that evolves over time, that everybody can refer to and know exactly what was agreed at the start. And as changes though, that we got, the very first thing you see is a change log in our workflow document. So if anything changes, they know it on the front page. And it's really hard, like, you sit there and say to people, well, this is what we do, and then, well, we just want a packaged up dailies DI package. And it's really hard to sort of give yourself that, articulate your value. But it's when you hear people say that, that's what people don't get with us. So yeah, that's the...
Very cool. Nadia, we were talking the other day, and you had some thoughts on, sort of metadata pipeline, but as it affects you from a colorist and a creative standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a freelancer, so it also marks a difference, I think, than working in-house. So every time I work in a production, I try to insist and make a lot of time in asking for meetings with the new VFX team, all the team involved in grading, the post house, the projectors, the monitors, anything we're going to use. And creatively, I work with them for the cinematography department, but I really rely on people obsessed with metadata. I really need it. And I want to, yeah, and I really want to give us some light on the conforming process, because in independent productions, where the team is smaller and the resources are smaller, sometimes this is not really kind of taken care of when it's done in the last minute. And when the conform process is really not fine-tuned, it can produce later issues on VFX plates, VFX production, just grading as well. So in that sense, I think it's kind of good to give it some light. Yeah.
Tamás.
I just wanted to say that it's so crazy that there's so many people trying to solve so many kind of problems at the same time, and it's all for the main purpose of the cinematographer to achieve, like, once they read the story and like visualize how it's going to look, to make sure that that's the end result, and everyone is like trying to solve that.
I just want to say something on that though, because you're right. But we obviously spent a bit of time on this festival, right? And we watch what you've been doing. And all I can think of when I watch that is when I watched Dune 2, I never thought that... I watch these films and I break them down. And I say, how did they do this? How did they do that? They did this like that. When I watched Dune 2, I never thought that was done in VFX. That's how they did this. And it's only when I started talking to you that I started to realize how things were achieved and broken down. And I never imagined that. And I think to take someone as technically minded as myself that spent that time on production, and to forget about everything and just watch the movie, like that to me is a monumental achievement. And I'd put that to things greater than cinematography. I put that down to the composing of sound.
What is greater than cinematography?
Oh, then this is where it gets controversial, folks.
Metadata is greater.
No, the one... Right.
Switch off the cameras, it's going to get personal.
Hang on a second. Because I'm obsessed with cinematography, and sometimes you just need that extra layer of seasoning, and that's the composition, the sound. And when the substance, right? It was one of the most... That film had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. And if you turned off the audio, it just... If you watch Jaws without sound, it's just a bunch of empty ocean shots.
It's what I always thought about Jaws. I thought, what is this? A bunch of empty ocean.
All right, so I think we sort of covered off, metadata and that sort of flow through, and then sort of in moving to the visual effects. Catherine's brought in some material from House of the Dragon that we'll go through. But for those of you who haven't had experience on visual effects shows yet and don't understand this sort of cascading small army that is often involved in these productions, and why it's important to do things like Tamás is doing, so that there is, a rallying sort of visualization of things. Why the metadata is important. You have the show side visual effects supervisor, who is then in charge of contracting and managing multiple companies, signing them from hundreds to thousands of shots. That person then has to manage multiple visual effects supervisors at those studios, who then have to manage their heads of department, who then have to manage all the people on their teams. All those people are there trying to execute the best work possible to support the end results of the cinematographer. Budget, schedule, technology, have they done that job before? Is it the first time? There's a lot that goes on in that. And so, as production teams from on set, communicating as much as possible and sharing as much as possible with, into post, so those people can be successful, is really important. And so, in that whole process from pre-vis through onwards, the metadata and everything else, that's why they asked for it. And like Catherine said, her visual effects supervisor said, give me the focus data. I will plug it in, and then that's just one less thing that they worry about. But I'll stand off the pulpit for a moment. All right, so Catherine, how would you like to start this? Do you want to go through the clips, or would you like to start with the storyboards?
No, let's start with the storyboards. Yeah, so
Okay.
I mean, just what I was describing before about like what are the tools that I know how to use to communicate, with visual effects, and it literally starts off like this. Even before this, it's just a conversation between me and the director. Maybe we're making a shot list. Then we sit down with the storyboard artist. So yeah, so what I brought in is just like the visual examples, taking you through this one sequence from House of the Dragon, season 2, episode 3. And so yeah, so these are the boards, obviously, yeah, they speak for themselves. You guys have seen storyboards before, so yeah, you can just scroll down that so you can get an appreciation for where it starts. And we do iterations of these boards, obviously. So that process, takes the time it takes. They're informed, obviously, by locations, by sets, and obviously the dragon design, which is all done before I start. So all of that information we have when we sit down with the artist, and we send it to him, and so so basically so that it's as accurate as possible from a drawing perspective. Then actually, why don't you show the ones without the notes if you have? It's the other PDF. I mean, it doesn't matter, but basically, once we're happy with the boards, then we either are getting on a call with the previous company, or we're just talking them through with the supervisor. And so they're going to the previous company, and they're sending us back, just these static shots that are from the boards, right? You can see that it's basically shot for shot, and then we're noting so this is like a, this is literally how we communicate, notes and scribbles, and, we'll get on a call if we feel like the scribbles aren't telling the story. So we do that, and then once we're sort of happy with that, then they animate it. So I don't know if you want to play the thing. Yeah. And obviously now, as soon as you add motion, this is why actually the call stage is important, so that you can, like how this starts with like this sort of frenetic flying. That was really important to my director, Geeta Patel, because of, what this is coming out of. This is like Damon has just had an argument, and so he's like, this kind of, drunk driving kind of a vibe is, or angry driving, I should say. It's not drunk. Angry. We wanted that to be part of it, and you have to, that's hard to communicate with a static drawing. So that we're sort of describing to them. We also, could have shown this, but I have a lot of videos of like my own hand doing what I want the dragon to do, or we have little toys that we fly around just so that they can get a sense of the dynamics that we're looking for. And anyway, but once they do a pass of this, then again, it's totally iterative. We get on more calls, we make more notes, and it keeps going literally until either you're happy, it gets signed off, or you can't do it anymore because it's time to shoot it. And then I brought in the final sequence so you can sort of see how it winds up Did you get that off the drive? Yeah, there it is. Okay. I guess there is one more stage here where there was a little bit of tech viz for the buckwork, right? That's the actual stuff we're shooting with Damon on the Dragon, and that shot, that high angle shot that we had boarded, that was in the pre-vis. What their tech viz told them was actually like a height and an angle that we could not achieve on set with the tools we had, and I remember just being like, well, you know, can we just shoot it anyway? Because I think it's going to work. And it totally works, you know. And the supervisor came up to me later, you know, once they were down the road to be like, it does work. So I tell that story just simply because, like, all these tools and all the precision and all the, you know, computing power that we have, I think it shouldn't be a limitation. Like, you should still be trying to put the camera where you want, get the shots you want, and often, you know, it can be achieved. It can be figured out in the end. But yeah, anyway, I hope that's an interesting sort of illustration of how, you know, because I think, yeah, that's for the most part, apart from, you know, the little bit of buckwork that we had to do for that, it's all CG, but still it was, you know, I feel like a co-author in that because, you know, it came from me and the director sitting down and knowing, you know, the shots we wanted, knowing the sequence we wanted, you know, being able to communicate that. You know, obviously, you know, we also had, you know, some lighting references to share and stuff like that, and just being part of the process, because ultimately, you know, as soon as the shoot is over, we're gone, and then it's in their hands, and so they only have all of that pre-visualization information and conversations to go off of, really, because then we aren't involved after that. But I think, you know, how the sequence wound up was just like how I thought about it when I moved my hand around in space, kind of a thing.
Oh, very cool. So Fabian, you've just recently shot Venom: Let There Be Carnage, super duper visual effects in that. Another, you know, many visual effects heavy shows. When does it work? When are you at the happiest, and when are the ones that are the most challenging for you in terms of your happiness with the outcome, given, you know, your sort of stated preference for inspirational creativity?
I mean, I just generally, you know, like I said earlier, I love collaborating with people, and for me, the visual effects guys have become a very, you know, enjoyable part of that. And so I always try, you know, when you have a good visual effects supervisor and a good visual effects team, you know, that's really enjoyable. And so I always, you know, we had that on Venom, we had a lot of fun together. We constantly talk. I can be a real pain in the ass for them, and it's the other way around too, so it's great, but that's a good thing. And, you know, we just constantly push each other. And then, you know, like Katie said, you know, once you wrap, you're gone. But I always try and keep a relationship going. So throughout the whole post process, I was texting and talking to John, who was our super, and, you know, he would send me stills of stuff they've done, and he would be like, hey, what do you think of this? I'm putting a flare in there, or I'm doing this. Or he would go like, oh, you know, do you remember that day when I asked you not to put that lamp over there because it's going to make it really difficult? That's why it's really difficult. And so we would just like talk all the time and, you know, keep, you know. So I love being a part of that, because I think the more you can be a part of that, the better. So. I will say the only time that we come back, obviously, is for the grade. And recently, that's for what's been my experience is I'm getting in there actually before all the visual effects are done. And that's sometimes actually quite interesting, because
you'll get to be in there and seeing the temp work, and oftentimes, I'll have notes, and whether that annoys them or not, then I'm getting them to come down and being like, actually, like, see this, like, we should do a sky replacement here, like, can we, and that makes our grading time easier too, like an entire sequence where you actually, there's a sequence in season 2 where it ends up, like when we finally turn around and look out at the water, it's sunset, and so much of what happens before we had to shoot before that, obviously. And so to make the grade make sense, to make it all flow, the skies had to be replaced, and that's something that, I was in the grade, calling them up, being like, hey, can you guys do this? Because it'll tie the whole thing together.
Very cool. And I think that's a great segue to Nadia in terms of your experience then in that process, getting temp VFX, trying to finish your work, and also your ability as a colorist with a growing set of tools to start to do more of those, sort of the basic VFX fixes to also help finish the frame.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size of the production, the budget, and the time. That's really a very significant factor. And then the team that you have for all the developing of that process. But yeah, like mainly in grading, sometimes in smaller productions, we are asked to do some small VFX work. And then just in general, having ready all the VFX pools, all the timeline ready to bring it back, paste the grading. I'm currently working on a very art house Peruvian film. And the team is really, really small, so the communication is very important, but everybody is spread around the world. And we I had to push a bit of the loop tests with the VFX department to actually make sure that when they come in last minute, before releasing or any festival or whatever running around, that the grading we did actually works and the color spaces are not messed up. So in that sense, it's really important, yeah.
Very cool. All right, moving on to your final section before we go to Q&A. So color grading, finishing, all the work that you do. What about it do you love? What is your collaboration like with cinematographers and the other people in the production process? And what sets you up to be the most successful? But I think we've got a couple of your images first.
Yeah, as I said, I'm freelancing, so I have the privilege of working in different sizes and types of productions, commercials, short films, analog, digital, a bit of everything. I guess what I mostly enjoy is the creative part. I have to say, all the technical part, if I have someone for support that takes care of metadata, I'm very happy. But just all the collaboration and meeting people that you align with creatively, I think is the best part, yeah. And also has the best results, I would say. There's a film I worked on a few years ago that actually I didn't bring material about it, but I think it's interesting VFX-wise. It's Color Out of Space, cinematography by Steve Annis. We did the post-production in Spain in a post house called User T38. And it was a very interesting process. I have to spoil the subject of the film to actually talk about it, but since it was released like 5 years ago, I hope it's okay. Basically, towards the end of the film, every animated subject species or anything turns from green to magenta. So this required a lot of conversations and working in parallel of the grading and the VFX department to turn, especially all the night scenes or underexposed scenes, that actually you could turn this into magenta, considering their opposite colors in the color wheel, without creating noise artifacts and making it look natural considering it's a sci-fi B-movie. Natural aliens, yeah. So that was an interesting one to actually work on. And from the supporting material I brought, I think there's another project that...
Yeah, I think we got your music video and then the your sort of workup clip after that.
Yeah. I mean, the music video is quite long, but if you...
Yeah, we can...
if you're up for it. What's interesting about this, it's quite simple. I mean, it was shot on 16 millimeters, but it does have towards the end a few compositing shots. And it was interesting to take care of the texture so that once they actually mixed the shots, we wouldn't have issues with the grain in that sense. I think if you scroll down towards the end, there's a wide shot of the artist Brodka with the bird on the side and a few horses at the end. And but this one was quite a simple one. Yeah. It's also a Polish production, so it's nice to have a Polish project here in Camerimage. Yeah.
All right, would you like me to go to the next clip then?
Yeah, because they're quite long. If you can pull out the trailer for the feature film.
Oh, this is just the breakdown that shows your work before and after?
Thank you. Yeah, so basically, this is the log material, and the baselet is just myself drawing a curve to kind of make a base grade for everything. And then after that, just the look development with the cinematographer Mikolaj.
That's one of my shots.
And this project is interesting. It's actually a feature from the film school in Berlin. It was shot on DV cam, Betacam SP, and 60 millimeters. So it was the craziest post-production process because it was really like no budget, no resources, just the film school itself. We had to take all the DV digital material, go through a restoration process in Nucoda to upgrade the resolution and create any artifacts as well, and do a pre-grade. And once all this was done, we actually took it back to the lab, printed on 16, and then took everything in 16 with the original 16 and did the final grading. So here, continuity is something that is kind of there on and off in a way, but it's part of the magic of the story itself. It's a family road trip, and it takes back to these like family videos, but with a feature film structure. Yeah.
So sorry, what was the camera original again? What was
DV cam, Betacam, and 16 millimeter.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they had a really hard time finding those cameras that worked. Yeah, and they were traveling inside a little car, 5 friends shooting this film. So it was kind of like a challenge, I would say, but interesting process.
Yeah, and then how much did the original source material start to inform the look? And then how did you kind of layer on top of that?
Actually, yeah, it does form the look because the contrast ratio is quite harsh in that sense. Like the digital cameras don't have enough of latitude or range to keep details in the highlights or in the blacks, while the 16 does. So that was kind of a back and forth process, yeah.
You're dealing with a Rec 709.
Sorry?
I mean, those DV cam. I mean, DV cam was originated so that you could shoot your home video and watch it on your TV. Mm-hmm. Betacam SP was invented so you could shoot your news, cut it, and broadcast it without any retrospective grading process. Whereas you obviously have a bit more, room with 16mm than you do with those, straight to air type cameras.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just interesting mixing everything and trying to put it together in the most narrative, cohesive way. Yeah.
And then how did you manage the relationship with the cinematographer through that, if you had to work through all those different acquisition cameras and then with the intent for how it was going to be structured through time with the flashbacks and the memories?
Actually, before they shot, we did some tests when they found the cameras that worked. And we did tests also of the 60mm and all the cameras with the lenses that they had built in. And inside and outside the car, low exposure, high exposure. And then even in the developing process, we had issues with the lab. So we had to do a lot of back and forth as well. So it was kind of like a terrifying, exhausting process, but one of the best learning experiences, I would say, yeah.
Very cool. All right. Okay, so I hope you guys have found that very informative. Anybody got any questions? Okay, well, we got at least 2 to start with. Oh, we got multiple. All right, let's start with the gentleman down the front here.
Hi. I guess this question is mainly for Nadia and Mark, but everybody can answer. What are the most common mistakes you guys see DPs making that make the process difficult for you? And how can those be avoided potentially?
How long have you guys got? I do think that a lot of issues can be eliminated by just getting on the page at the start. Like if you've got that cultural alignment, and you've got that level of trust, then you can eliminate a lot of those issues. Fixing things in prep, just putting that time in up front and making sure that the workflow's ironed out, everybody's on the same page. So our approach to that is we speak to all the heads of department, sound, VFX, everything. We aggregate all the information. So when we do the workflow calls, we are telling everybody what we're doing because it's already been agreed. So we kind of treat that like we're going into Parliament. Everybody's on the same page. And then I think, I suppose the DIT's worst nightmare, as Fabian alluded to before, is when DPs want to shoot things darker and darker and start underexposing stuff. Probably my pet hate about that is, I think there's a better way of doing it, which I'm going to talk about right now, is that if you're shooting if you're shooting RAW on these cameras, you could quite often just knock the ASA down on the camera and it looks darker, but you're still dealing with the camera, the negative is still the negative. So I often say that the optimum digital negative and the look that you want are two separate things, and you should leave it to your DIT to produce the optimum digital negative and then work together to produce the look that you guys want. Because one of the things I'd say about that, and I'm only advocate cinematographer's intent, but when you are dealing with the complex engine that is VFX, when you underexpose the camera by a stop, you're effectively throwing away, you're producing data. And when you underexpose the camera a stop, you're effectively throwing away half the data. You underexpose the camera 2 stops, you've thrown away 3/4 of the data. It's like for every 4 pages in a book, you've ripped out 3. And you're trying to now rebuild that story. So whatever you can do to maintain that full set of information, but still have that intent there, is, I think, something that we try to ensure.
Counterpoint?
So the only problem with that is that I did a show, a TV movie, probably about 12 years ago, and it was Sean Bean playing a transvestite. And we had Stevie Graham in the film, and it was one of the best scripts I've ever read, a great director who I worked with for a long time, and we shot, that was one of my first jobs, I think on the early Alexa, maybe it was a D21 or something. And because I didn't know the format out well, and because of all the things, and we did a similar show the year before, but that was still 35mm. I went down that route of exposing it very correctly and, doing everything to the book. And it was probably, I still remember my focus puller who I've worked with for 15 years saying to me, I think this is the best stuff you've ever done. And I felt so proud of that show, and every composition was great, the look was great, and I couldn't attend the grade. And because I didn't go in the grade, because I was on a different show, and I think I was actually in Australia shooting, the producer came in, and they changed the look of the show, not just, like they normally be like, oh, can this be a bit darker, brighter, lighter light. They changed the whole look. Every single thing, from the color to the grain to the... And it turned out to be the worst looking thing that I could have ever imagined. And and personally, for me, it was such a, and I still dream about it now, because I love that show, and and it was very, very sad. And so, yeah.
I'd say the problem there is not technological, though. The problem there is psychological. And the challenge there is not, it's not, it's just, again, trying to get everybody to buy in your vision. And I think that the thing that we try to do, and there's a couple of things about that, because what you're talking about there is, as you said, was 12 years old. The cameras are different, but the way we're able to establish the workflow now means that no one would actually know. And because when you bring that media, if you set, say, an Alexa shooting RAW to 200 ASA, that appears on the timeline like it's 200 ASA, it looks dark to them. Just means that if you do need to get it, I always think if you've got dark skins in the shadows, it's always that thing where you think, oh God, hang on a second. I did a TV show, Misfits, in 2009, and we had a very dark-skinned actor that was always in the shadows, and you're just like, oh, am I going to get in trouble at, at some point here? And just being able to, do that now where you shoot it at 200 or so, know that you've got something up your sleeve.
Thanks, guys. Just want to take this back to Nadia's, the sort of original point for the question. What are your challenges as a colorist, coming from how things are shot and what can be done? What can you ask for?
Well, one of our main responsibilities is continuity. So anything that can help on that narrative and lighting, texture-wise, is one of the most important. Otherwise, the job becomes sometimes forcing the footage into a different direction. Especially requests as weather, we shoot in the winter, we want the summer, stuff like that. But more continuity-wise, also in optics and lenses that you can choose. And regarding the experience of the TV movie, when I grade, I also find myself in situations where the cinematographer's artistic intent is then changed throughout the process because of the client or the producer or whoever's in charge. So communication, having things clear, having all the team aware of what's next, what's needed, I think is really important. But yeah, some films where, also it depends on the market you work for. If you work in Europe or if you work for the US, the process and who decides, who puts the money is very different. And there, the kind of like hierarchy or decision-making process is very different as well, yeah.
Okay, I think you had a question. We'll just pass the mic down. We'll come back to you. It's on, we can hear it.
Oh, okay. I just want to say this is a great seminar. I really enjoyed it. But, the question I have, this is for the entire panel in general. What is the most challenging part of doing pre-vis and the problems that you guys still face or you have faced doing pre-vis? An example would be, I've seen a lot of people do this. They rush the pre-vis process and just go straight into shooting. So I'd like to ask y'all, what's that challenges that you have faced, or stuff like that?
To me, the biggest problem is like a creative one in the sense that a lot of previous artists, you talk about what you want, you go through it, you do the storyboards, and then you get something back, and it's actually physically not possible to achieve, or it does not fit in with the style of the show that you're doing, and that's something I seem to encounter quite a lot. You can't physically put the camera there. You can't physically. It just doesn't work. So.
I mean, I guess your question about like, is there enough time to do it is one that often gets asked because it does take time, basically. And sometimes you get to a stage where like, you've run out of time, so then you do just have to go into the shoot. And all that means really is just that nobody's it's fine. It just makes things slightly harder for the VFX team, later because they haven't broken it all down the way that they need to. They haven't budgeted it. They haven't, assigned certain shots to certain vendors. So I think it does make their life a lot harder. For us, it can sometimes be a lot more freeing because the other issue with the previs, not just that like it's sometimes not physically achievable, but just that people get very attached to certain aspects of it, and you find yourself on set and you actually see, oh no, there's a better way to shoot this, so could we just do it this way? Or the actor even is like, oh, well, I actually have a totally different idea about my performance or whatever, and so then if not everybody is sort of flexible, then you run into these sticking points of, oh, well, that's not how it is in the previs, and so the directors who I work with, like, it's a tool, and then when you get on set, it's like, you can use it, but you can move beyond it as well, and so that's, I don't know, that's been my experience of how it can work, but.
Yeah, and what I'd say is those of you who are still at your educational journey, if you are an aspiring cinematographer, and if you're at a school that has visual effects or computer graphics programs, go find those people in the pub if you don't already know them. Spend time together and share knowledge, right? No visual effects artist gets into the business to want to do substandard work or not satisfy the requirement. But there's just a lot to learn. And so I think if you want to learn about previs as a cinematographer, go find the people that know how to run the software to help you out and share knowledge. And that's how eventually we can create cohorts of teams that come out of schools with both sets of skills. And it can be concentrated on one side or the other based on that. So that's I think the sort of the way to solve this in the future. A young lady over here had a question. We've got at least another 20 minutes before we have to be out, so we'll get through everybody's questions. Sorry, if you can help get the microphone over to the lady in the bandana, please. Oh, we got another one. Okay. If you can pass that over to the guys so that they can redistribute it. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi. It's very interesting. I'm actually a little bit surprised because I'm not a metadata freak. My question...
There's always time.
My question is that I have often experienced that with all this pre-vis stuff, people get used to knowing everything beforehand. And I also have like a little bit of a fight with producers all the time. And sometimes when you're in these meetings and you pre-visualize and you talk, the discussions become very unfocused. And you start to talk about things that aren't actually like relevant. And they're just the pre-vis, you know? And I was wondering if you have had this experience and how you manage it. Because sometimes I have like a very harsh way of telling people like, this is not important, we should talk about this because we need to decide this now and this we can do later. Or is it more about maybe just like keeping some people out of certain meetings because like some people don't necessarily have like the skill set to talk about something, but they still want to be in the meeting? Do you know what I mean?
Maybe. Can you give a specific example about what you're talking about?
For example, I was supposed to shoot a very difficult scene on like a platform up like 3 meters on a building, a glass building, and then they wanted to replace the background, so they wanted green screen behind the actors because they wanted to fake it to be like a lot higher still. And the meeting was with the VFX woman, me, the director, and we had 3 producers. And we kept talking about how to do this and how to achieve this. And I tried to like make them understand how difficult it is to do this, especially on a film that has no money at all, because it was like student, very low budget production. And then at some point I kind of like just resorted to okay, I think we need to test this to make them understand how difficult this is. But like in the meeting, you sit there for 2 hours and they talk and talk and talk, and you think this is a waste of time because we're like talking about a lot of theoretical stuff, but we're not talking about like the practical issues that we're going to have.
I mean, you basically want to keep the 3 producers out of the room, right? But that's
Yes.
that's not possible in the real world. So it just comes down to, again, just communication, you know, and trying to, you know, and that can be a very frustrating process. I'm the same. I get a little bit harsh sometimes when it's, you know, going on for too long. But I don't think I have a diplomatic answer for that one.
Yeah, well, I think it sounds like it's like that those people would maybe want to talk that long, whether you had done the pre-vis or not. And sometimes, you know, actually having a way of showing, you know, this is what it takes, you know, can cut those conversations shorter. But sometimes they just need to talk it out, I guess, until, you know, I mean, that's why I love being on set, right? Because you only have so much time to talk, and then you just have to do it. So yeah, prep can be a very frustrating place for a cinematographer for that reason. I totally agree.
Thank you for that question. All right, other questions? We got one in the back.
Hey guys, this is a question I guess for just everyone, but what are some effective ways to convince lower budget productions of the value of a DIT and a colorist brings, especially when they're hesitant to budget constraints?
I'll start. Yeah, I think it's very, very important, especially when you're studying or starting to work, to kind of get the habit to create communication and to try to explain what your needs are as a cinematographer to the production and the post team. So once you build this habit, when you go up the scale and start working, you take it with you. And then I have to say it's really important for us as colorists to take care of the look or the artistic intent to be carried out in the editing process. Because everybody gets attached to an image. It's a very long process, and you get emotionally attached to it, and it really affects the narrative. So it's very important to get the IT and the colorist on board together before the shoot. Yeah.
So I'm just going to give you the counterpoint of that, because I'm doing a short film in a couple of weeks, which I'm really looking forward to, and it's very super low budget, there's no money, and we're shooting digitally, but I've decided not to have a DIT, not just for money reasons, but also because I'm actually really looking forward. I'm going to treat it, even though it's digital, I'm going to treat it like a film camera, and I'm kind of really looking forward to just doing that process again like that. And obviously there will be a color process at the end, but I'm going to do a lot with a colorist that I can load in, and then I'm going to shoot to that, and I'm quite looking forward to a couple of days of just doing that way.
I guess it's a little bit easier though when it's a short form, maybe. Like I just did quite a low budget feature where, yeah, it was the producer's original idea that that to save money we would have somebody who was more of a data manager rather than a DIT. And the way I convinced him, I'm trying to think about how I did it. To be honest, he trusted me in the end, so that's how we did that. But I think as soon as my DIT came on board, he produced one of the things we've been talking about here, like the workflow document, right? And just something as simple but as detailed as that, like suddenly the producer was like, oh, well, that was great, you know, because actually it's the whole film is sort of this person becomes this person's responsibility in the moment that you're shooting it, and if you're trying to save money on that person, then you can, you know, I mean, you can save it there, and then you can spend it much later if you know, if it's not all ironed out and it doesn't all flow. So in the end, you know, everybody was very grateful that that I had Bob. Hi, Bob.
Thank you.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, I think that having sort of all those comments there, I kind of agree with all of them, and I don't think that, I think at times you just need to find out what's really right for the production. Sometimes things just need to move in a certain different way, and you need to do it as Fabian's doing it, and sometimes it's just a bit more complex, and the DIT becomes actually a really essential part of that production. But I'm a firm believer, you know, I used to think of, was it Jean-Luc Godard that would want to sort of arrive with his eclair in the glove box of the car before everybody else arrived and just shoot, you know, and I'm all for that sort of filmmaking process. But at the same time, he didn't have hundreds of VFX artists working in Mumbai, Vancouver, and London, and didn't have to join that all together. So productions vary in size and scale, and you just need to work out what's right for that particular production.
Okay, any other questions? Well, we got one down here at the front.
Thank you for your time on the panel. I really appreciate it. Fabian, you mentioned about your intuition and how you like to work from that. If you could talk, maybe to the whole panel, if you could expand on like how you've trained your intuition within your craft, and where you find your sort of inspiration to hone that muscle, and then same thing with Nadia as well, with how you've sort of found your style as a colorist, which is very unique, because specifically within coloring, you can give the same footage to 10 different colorists and it's all different. So that's sort of the beautiful thing about that process.
I mean, I think for me, it's all about, I'm still training, I'm still learning every single day, and there's lots more I have to learn. So I think that just keeps on going. I don't think I've found exactly what I'm doing, But the reason why I love intuition, I'm a very intuitive person. When it comes, this is not just a work thing, but it comes to everything in my life, and I just love reacting to things, and I think, that's what keeps me interested. And obviously I do, you do jobs for the jobs, commercials where you don't work that way because you can't, and that's fine. But, the one thing I love about cinematography is, adapting and adjusting and being thrown into the deep end and, working problems out with people. That's the fun part for me, is the collaboration with the people, and so I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah, I would say I agree with him. I am collaboration, and it's like an ongoing learning process. Each project is very specific as well. But in my case, I would say we do all sorts of jobs. We don't show everything, and we are very versatile. In the end, we maybe what you see, you kind of decide or feel there's a style, but we do other things that are maybe in another way, and as well. And in my case, my background is still documentary photography, so I always have this at the back of my head, and maybe the way where I grew up, or the taste of things I've consumed, TV shows or music videos when I grew up, my hobbies outside work, exhibitions and stuff, also kind of mark the things I see and the things I kind of replicate in my intuition and taste as well. Yeah.
Okay, I think we had a question over here.
Hi, thank you. This seminar has been fantastic, and thanks for all your time. In years past, going back, maybe 5 years, I'm remembering from Camerimage, there was a lot of talk about resolution. Hasn't been brought up this year, and hasn't been brought up during this panel, but there's a lot of talk of metadata, and it's a VFX panel and all that. On Game of Thrones and The Last of Us, I believe those shows were shot on the Alexa Mini, which wasn't quite 4K. Has anything changed? I mean, I'm personally not that interested in resolution, but I'm just curious, has anything changed these days with that? Are you still shooting those shows on, do they have to be above 4K now? Are you changing your camera systems? Do you even care about resolution? Are the VFX teams asking for higher res, or I'm just curious if that's important.
I don't care about resolution at all, as long as it looks good. Wherever I look through and it looks good, that's good to me. It just depends on the show that you're doing. I mean, everything you still see is 2K when you watch it in the cinema, so it's all getting down res anyway. But I think a lot of shows are now doing 4K for future-proof and all of that stuff. I mean, a lot of the times I've done a film where I was 100% sure we were going to shoot digital just because it had 1,000 and 3,000 visual effect shots. And we ended up shooting 35mm because our VFX super was like, no, this is going to be great.
So The Last of Us, I didn't do season 1, and season 2 we shot Alexa 35. So obviously that's now with the advent of that camera, that lets us still use the Super 35 Cooke lensing that season 1 was shot on, but with the added resolution. So nobody talked about it. I think the choice to shoot that camera was not because of the resolution, but because of the color science and the sensor. But it's obviously an added benefit of just where the technology is going, yeah.
Okay, so I'll throw one into the mix. We're seeing a lot of 65mm image circle lenses. We've just put out one. What is the choice for you guys between Super 35 full frame, Super 16, and now the increased options for shooting 65mm? When is that a technical choice, and how does that fit into your creativity? When would you choose each of those formats, and why?
I mean, I think it's great because it gives you so much more choice, right? So we can have so much more ability to choose what is right for each project. So for example, this next one, from the moment I read the script, because a part of it takes place on Earth and the other part takes place on on another planet, and I always and we have to do IMAX too, and I was always like straight away said, look, I'd love to shoot this on 2 different formats, you know, and it's great that we can so easily switch between those formats now, and so that whole process has been made a lot easier and cheaper for production, and so the cheaper it is, the more possible it is to do. So I think it's great.
And I think it's, I mean, for me, it's never a, I don't think about the technical with the original decision. The original decision comes from, how we want it to look like, and that's, so it's all artistic, it's all creative. And then the technical stuff gets worked out afterwards. I mean, I think House of Dragon Season 1 is a good example because we shot that on Alexa 65 and the mini LFs, and they had to figure out that workflow in post, which I think was challenging, but they did it because you wanted them to.
Okay, I think we got time for 1 or 2 questions left.
Hi, thank you. We deal with a lot of vintage lenses and don't currently put any eye data in the lenses. Do you think it would be a huge advantage if we did, if we could only go as far as kind of getting a focal distance and a T-stop, for instance, and not going for the whole mapping?
I think there's a couple other things that would need to be in there to take care of what is our sort of next generation of the eye technology stack. We haven't talked a lot about in the panel, but simply put, we figured out how to map the distortion of lenses at a subpixel accuracy, both spherical and anamorphic, driven by the lens metadata, because lenses are a living, breathing entity as you operate them. So there are some things in there where that would help. But there's other ways. So if you come up afterwards, I can give you a whole rundown on what your opportunities are. But if you're dealing with vintage lenses and you do want to work with metadata, I'd say don't not do it. Just figure out how to do it. And that part of that could be conversations with us, and part of that conversations can be with companies that put encoders on lenses from the outside to capture metadata. But it is absolute gold. And if you want the visual effects team to succeed, you have to pass this information on to them.
I think what I learned today from Mark here, the more metadata you can put into it, the nicer life will be.
Well, I just come off the back of that as well, because I think that I think technology's changing. It's always changing, and soon we'll, like, as lenses start to we have an expression: are they smart lenses or are they dumb lenses? And eventually, you know, the smart lenses are going to become much more, you know, as we can get that data through the pipeline much easier, which we can do now. Those smart lenses will start to show their benefits in visual effects, and then we start to need to put external encoders on it. There is a challenge with external encoders, and that is that the department that needs those external encoders aren't the ones responsible for maintaining those external encoders. And the person that has to maintain those external encoders, you know, they have no skin in the game. So when something goes wrong, all eyes are on the wrong person that has to fix that. So if you could put that in the lens and eliminate that from someone's responsibility there, that's a huge, you know, that's a huge benefit to the production.
Right. So. But I'll also sort of add on top of that, you know, metadata can go wrong in multiple places, and so, you know, there needs to be more conversations like this about why metadata is important, how each person on set and in the post-process can help maintain it and make sure it gets to the people that need it. So I think we're at the point now where there's going to be an urgency and a growing sort of momentum behind that, because it doesn't have to be hard. It can be recorded into the camera. It doesn't have to be an onerous process, right? You don't need to have an external system to do it. So it's just about awareness of the value of it, right? And whatever the size of the camera team, you know, given the number of visual effects shots, the size of the visual effects team could dwarf the camera team. And so them understanding the value to the production and to the final images that they're trying to create is really important. Yeah. Rob, you had a question or a comment?
I was just going to answer. Is it working? Yeah, I just going to ask a question. So does your lenses record XYZ data?
Let's just say they have the sensors, and how that data gets out of it is a bit of a discussion.
Is it possible, though? Is that?
But we have, essentially, we have accelerometers, gyroscopes, and magnetometers. It's more about, we have some work left to do on how that data then from those sensors is extracted and passed on.
But is it physical? Because it's very helpful if you're doing a visual effects show and you want to now see the object that is not going to be there, but it's going to be there later in post-production. That you can actually see it and compose the shot based on the fact that you are driving the seat like Unreal or whatever, and you can actually frame the shot the way you'd like to. So basically, it's your pre-vis on the set. You're designing the shot on the set, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, there was a production called The Comandante. It was an Italian indie feature film shot with a $15 million budget, and they used Cooke lenses plus encoders on the dollies and the cranes to actually get that similar workflow.
I've done that before where you encode it, but if it's on the lens and the lens is accurate and you can record it, that's super valuable.
Yes, there's some ongoing development that would have to make that, improve that, but fundamentally it's there.
Okay. I have a film that I'd like to use it on. So if you
well, we're at Hotel 2031, everybody. We'll be there about an hour from now, so come on by and we'll go into more detail. All right, I think we have one. Do we have one last question in the audience? We do. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. I was just curious, like for colorists, what elements, especially on low budget, it's quite difficult to have a good camera test or have the actual set. What elements do you prefer to have to sort of clear this pipeline of the look? I always struggle with, getting the right things in the frame and making everybody's intuition on board on what elements to actually look at.
I think first it's a mindset issue. I think we need to kind of, we work with the images you create, so the sooner you get us in the pipeline, the more we can guide or help in getting your artistic intent through to the screen with the team, no matter how big or small the team is. And I believe there's always time to make tests, even if it's really hard, time and budget-wise. So I always ask the people I work with to kind of like decide what lenses, or try to get those lenses, or first get the casting, if it's not the final casting, that can be there, because they cannot be hired or paid in advance, to get people with similar skin color, similar makeup, similar lighting conditions. It wouldn't make sense if you're doing an exterior day to get a test inside the rental space, because the lights is different, you know? So those things in film schools and stuff, they work with what they can, but it's kind of like going around it and finding a way to get the more similar material, testing material, to the final script. Yeah.
But I think it is useful, like, I guess, yeah, because I feel like I get asked this a lot, like, not just about testing, but, you know, like, is it worth it to, you know, shoot a movie if you can't have an Alexa, or is it worth, you know, and I feel like, you know, whatever you can test with, it's worth it, you know, just as many of the variables as can be present is helpful. But, you know, I had very limited time between wrapping on The Last of Us and starting this low budget feature, and I literally just like took my dirty laundry to the rental house and put it in front of the camera, so at least we had some textures and some colors and something to start with. And, you know, and I like way downplayed it to the colors, being like, I'm really sorry, like this is, you know, I just had to do this really quickly. And he was like, oh, well, at least we have this, you know, at least it's not a chip chart. Like, so just anything that you can put there is, you know, of course, that you think will be there later is useful.
Yeah, definitely. Textures are very important, as she mentioned. And it's also the thought process, because even if you don't have the final material, casting people, whatever, it's just you are actually activating the thought of how you want to do it. So that's very valuable, yeah.
Very cool. All right, everybody, we'll have to wrap it up, but you know, if you have the opportunity in your Friday afternoon, thank you for spending your Friday morning with us. Cooke is over at Hotel 1231. We do have open house slots in the schedule. Come see us with our new lenses, the S8s, the macros, and we'll also be over there with Cooke Digital talking about the metadata and the more creative aspects of the metadata and how it's actually going to enable visual effects to support cinematographers. But thank you so much, panelists, for all your input.